on one second here. The Monday, August 16th, 2021 meeting of the Nevada Board of Wildlife Commissioners Mule Deer Enhancement Program for Management Area 1 and 2. And this is the subcommittee meeting for the discussion of our proposals. The time is 6:02. And just as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and it will be kept as part of the official record. So now we're going to take a roll call of all the subcommittee members. So when I call your name, please just state your name and that you're here. So Arnie Pitts.
Here.
Steve Robinson.
Here.
Larry Johnson.
Here.
Dan Ryan.
Here.
Joe Zwiffel.
Here.
Mark Freese.
Here.
And I'm John Ivanek and I'm present. So the second agenda item is the approval of the agenda. So the subcommittee will review the agenda and then you may take action to approve the agenda. And for that, I'll need somebody to make a motion to either change or accept the agenda.
But John, question on the agenda.
Yep.
The agenda reads that we're going to advance proposals. And I think that's premature. I think we're a ways away from advancing proposals. In fact, quite frankly, I need further discussion to even fill out the mule deer needs assessment form.
Okay.
And I would really appreciate and need input from Mark Freese and Dan before I think I could meaningfully put priorities to a number of those categories.
Okay.
So that's my 2 cents worth. I think in this meeting we should discuss those line by line, as well as the limiting factors, and set another meeting as soon as we can to advance proposals. It's my feeling on it.
So then for this meeting, just to clarify, you want to talk about the limiting factors worksheet and the mule deer needs assessment worksheet. And then the following meeting, you're proposing that we then sit down and put forth 3 proposals?
Yes.
Okay. And then, so I guess then we'll need somebody else to second that, or, anyone can comment on that.
Yep, this member Pitts, may I speak?
Yep, absolutely.
This, I think, I tend to agree with member Johnson says, but I think it's for possible action. I think we can leave the agenda the same. And who knows, after this discussion, we may come up with a project or we may not. We don't have to vote on any, but we can come up with some ideas. I think since it's for possible action, we could probably leave the agenda the same as it is.
Okay. I don't disagree. This is Larry Johnson.
So that being said, member Pitts would make a motion to accept the agenda as written.
I'll second that.
Okay.
I think we need to kick this out to public comment.
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yep. So then we'll have a 2-minute session for public comment. If any of the members that are attendees want to make a comment, you can raise your hand, or if you're here in person, then we can address any questions. So it's 6:06. Rex, did you have anything?
No comment.
Okay.
I'm gonna grab a beer. The recess for 2 minutes. Anybody want one? No, I do. I don't, just don't want to be recorded on the camera. Wendy's.
Yeah, okay, so you're excellent. The 2-minute comment period is over. Cassandra, were there any emails in the NDOW game email?
No, there were not. There was a hand up, but I don't see it up any longer. If whoever had their hand up would like to, okay.
Steve Kellers. Okay.
That's me. There I am.
All right, you're unmuted, Steve. Go ahead.
Hello, I just am attending the meeting because I'm very interested in what's going on with the mule deer situation. I've never been on a Zoom meeting before, so please forgive me if I goof something up. Anyway, that's all I got to say. I just wanted to introduce myself and that's it for now.
Okay, thank you. All right. And so with that, I think now we have to have a motion to accept the agenda after the public comment, since I did that a little out of order.
Member Pitts will make a motion to accept the agenda
And
as written.
Johnson seconds.
Okay. Great. So with that, we can move on to the third agenda item, which is member announcements and correspondence. And this is strictly informational, but it had come up that there was some conversations that were being had within the subcommittee via email that we just wanted to, put forth and make the public aware of. So we decided on a couple of meeting times and when we were going to have our mule deer enhancement field trip. That occurred on July 31st, which was a Saturday, and I'll share my screen here.
John, real quick, can
Yep.
you take a vote from all the subcommittee members?
Oh,
On the agenda.
take a vote on the agenda. Okay.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Okay, so the motion passes. Now we can move forward to agenda item number 3. And with that, I will share my screen. And what this is a map of the mule deer enhancement field trip that we took on Saturday. So you can see we went up and looked at some of the spots in the poodle fire and talked about fire rehabilitation and some of the chemical treatment that was done in the scar of the poodle fire. Then we went up to Hayes Canyon and looked at some juniper removal and talked about predator projects. Then from there, we moved down to Divine Springs and looked at a spring exclosure. And then after that, we went to another spring exclosure where they'd also fenced out some aspen patches. After that, we went up and looked at a large scale juniper removal as well as a grazing exclosure and looked at what was going on in the inner canopy, kind of in between the sagebrush, and compared inside the fence to outside. Then after that, we went and looked at some springs that were in some pretty poor condition. And then after that, we went down and looked at a patch where there was a pretty expansive die off of some of the sage. And then lastly, we reconvened and discussed where each of us was at with our potential proposal ideas. And that kind of brought us to determining that we wanted to have this meeting, which we decided would be on August 16th. And with that, do any of the subcommittee members have anything that you want to add to the correspondence that occurred between the last meeting and now? No? Okay. With that, we can move on to agenda item number 4. which is area 1 and 2 project proposals for possible actions. And with this, we're basically going to be discussing the limiting factor ranking sheet. And then we'll also kind of walk through the needs assessment worksheet. So as Larry had pointed out, I think we can talk through the limiting factor sheet first and then kind of see where things end up. Let's see here. What I did was I took, and each one of the subcommittee members have a tab down here for how they ranked each of these. And then I took that and averaged it out for each of these based on all of our responses. And so can you guys see what the group averages were? Are you able to see the shared screen?
I'm still seeing the stops.
Yeah,
My screen sharing is paused. Share my screen. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So with that, Larry, you had proposed that we walk through this line by line.
well, particularly the next sheet, which I didn't fill out, the needs assessment, simply because I wanted to hear additional discussion and data before I did so. The only thing that I wanted to point out as far as the limiting factor ranking sheet is down towards the bottom. There is also a category in which I don't have sufficient data on which to base a decision, and that is under the population portion under disease. We haven't been provided data for analysis or conclusions. It's impossible to rate that as a priority because we just don't have NDOW hasn't given us sufficient data on which to base a logical decision. Is there information available?
So unfortunately not. From the mule deer that we had collared and that project was started, it's kind of like what we talked about on the field trip where the whole point of that was to put collars on them and look at migration routes. But this upcoming fall, kind of like what Joe had suggested, when we put collars on deer, we're planning to, look at overall health assessments of the deer as well as taking blood samples to look at serology and see what diseases they've been exposed to. But, I will also tell you that just because we have blood doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have like a clear-cut answer that, they have this disease or they've been exposed to this disease. It's going to come back kind of like what a lot of those, like similar to COVID, where you can see what they've been exposed to and, what antibodies they have, but that's about the extent of what you get out of that blood until some of the collared ones do end up dying.
Will you be looking for blue tongue or any other diseases that can affect the reproduction survivability of fawns or abortion rates or miscarriages and so forth like that? Will you be collecting data, or is that data collectible?
So in terms of looking at miscarriage rate based off a disease, I'm not familiar with how we could analyze that. I'm kind of just thinking out loud here. We could very well take the blood and analyze it for EHD or blue tongue or something like that. In terms of how you would look at if that would affect fawn survivorship would be difficult unless you went out and looked at those collared does and saw which ones had fawns or did not have fawns, and then compared that to what antibodies they had. I don't know. Does anyone else have any ideas on how you would
I think what Larry's trying to say mainly, is it's hard to fill out a disease that portion without any kind of data handed to us. We have no clue. Yeah, do we want to investigate it? Absolutely. And I think that once you guys throw some callers out there, and if we can access them quick enough, so then 44% or whatever it is doesn't go to waste. If there is a disease, we can kind of figure it out, see what it is, all that good stuff. But we don't know what to put in for that for numbers based on we don't have anything. So that's kind of where we're at. That's what he's trying to say there, I think.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
it's just a big blank.
But yes, if it's disease, like we want to investigate, we want to look into it, absolutely. It's just it's hard to put anything on there without saying, yes, there's a problem here. That's why that's why the population is as low as it is, or it's kind of don't know what to put there.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm hearing you loud and clear. So you've got the importance of, figuring out if disease is an issue, but you can't, without sufficient data, you can't say, how important. You rank that on the limiting factors.
Yes.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
I'll second that. I mean, I didn't fill out that disease portion for that reason. It's like, I don't know if disease has ever been an issue in any of these units. And so that's why I couldn't rank it as well. So I'll second what Larry and Joe are talking about.
Okay.
How many, John, how many callers are you proposing to hang here in Washoe County?
So there's funding right now for about 45 collars to go out. And then there's also been talks of doubling that, but they're working on the funding source for it. So potentially, 90 to 100, but as of right now, we've only secured 45.
What kind of dollars are you talking about?
I wish Cody was here to talk more about the specifics of what each one of those collars cost, but I believe roughly, depending on what software you want on board, it's about $1,200 per collar.
Does that include hanging them, having someone capture and putting them on, all that?
I believe so. Cooper, do you want to weigh in on this? Do you know the intricacies of how much that costs a little better than?
That's what Allison was doing.
I don't have the number on hand, but it seems like that should include, with fuel prices changing, our aircraft rates might be, going up too. So we're fluctuating a little bit for our capture costs. But yeah, I think that 1,200 ballpark should get you, a rough estimate.
So you're short 50, 60,000 bucks. That's to get to 100 animals. Okay.
Correct. And then also, as we kind of talked about on the field trip, is just because you got 100 collars out there on the landscape, then getting to them and investigating them within a day or two is also, going to be man hours and money as well.
That's the whole task force thing. I'd like to get started for volunteers. And that's the exact reason why, because if you're going to hang that many collars and you're going to collect data, you can't have 40, 50% of them. It doesn't make sense to spend that money if you're not going to be able to get to them and acquire the data that they can give you. So that's why I was suggesting that whole volunteer task force mortality group that, again, I think it only benefit you and now everybody. If you have volunteer people going out to collect the data, you have like a bag of exactly what you want them to collect, the pictures, again, volunteer hours go back into the NDEL's pocket and no money's out of your guys' pocket. It just will help out make our funds go further and for you to collect data. I mean, if one caller goes out and no one can get to it, I get that. But if you have a team of 10 to 20 volunteers, I guarantee someone's going to go figure that out, but you're going to have less than 44% of the callers just with no data.
Right.
Especially with what's going on now. I feel it's so critical. We need to collect as much data as we can, as fast as we can. And you know, if we're going to hang callers, figure out what's going on or to help it out set some way. But yeah, I don't know.
John, this is Steve Robinson. Did you guys at the department discuss this issue, the legality of this task force, if it can be done?
I haven't heard anything more about whether that moved along or not. I think that we wouldn't have a problem with signing people up as volunteers. Where things get sticky is just in terms of giving people collar data from that's like less than a year old. I think that's where we're going to run into some issues, but
Even if they're dead.
yeah, I would assume that wouldn't matter, but
because if you hang 100 callers and you know, let's just say you have a rough week of 5 go out 1 week, 5 go out another week, are you going to have enough people, you and field biologists, technicians or whatever, to go collect them? And then it's like, I don't know, it's kind of a waste if you can't. Like 44% of the last data you guys have. I mean, that's pretty poor, I feel.
And John, I've done exactly this for Cody in past years. Okay. So I don't think there's an issue with legalities or procedures or anything like that. We've gone and retrieved collars and unfortunately they were, 2 months old or something or other like that. And so you could not make meaningful, coyotes had scattered the bones on and you could not make meaningful conclusions. You need to be there within 2 days or it's.
yeah, I mean,
it's no use doing it.
I'm in favor of, having the mule deer mortality recovery team or whatever it was we deemed the name of it. It's just, I got to figure out with higher ups the legalities of that, like you said, and if we can make that happen. But, I'm on board with it.
So John, if I can weigh in here real quick, we can get that process going. We just have to find an avenue for you to be the data holder and then relaying the exact coordinates of a collar to an approved volunteer, not necessarily giving them access to the collar data as it is uploaded.
Okay. So yeah, a mortality message would come in and then I just have to figure out how to relay that to the mortality recovery team or whatever.
And one way I feel, if it depends on how many volunteers you have, it could be like in a specific area. You don't have to give the coordinates right away. You can say who has time in the next 48 hours to collect data from this mortality caller in this general region. Whoever chimes back in on an email saying, hey, I can do it, then whatever, then you can personally just talk to that one person, give just the coordinates to that person, and then they go out and collect it. It's not like you're putting it out to everybody. I think that's a good way of doing it. Say, hey, it's up by Via, it's up by wherever, who can go up there in the next 48 hours, and then you can get specifics, maybe, if that helps. I don't know.
Yeah.
We should be able to pull this off and make it work. We should. And come up with some very good data.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm all on board for that. Dan, before you have to take off, was there anything that you particularly felt like really strongly that you wanted to like weigh in on with the limiting factors?
Sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing is before like getting into details, and I know you're talking about like collar data and stuff. I do think the group is all fully supportive of those kind of projects. The biggest thing that I would just want to recommend as a group is wherever those 45 or those 90 collars that get put out, if they're put out near some of the projects that NDOW and BLM and even the committee has been putting forward as far as like a priority. So I think it'd be interesting to collect data from some of those areas where we're actually doing some habitat improvement to see if it's making a difference and if it's how short term it is or how long term it is. And then same with the predator side of things. If we are going to focus doing some predator projects in some of these units, I really think focusing the collar data in those areas to see how, to be able to track and monitor those things would be a good recommendation. Obviously, you guys are the scientists, and that would be totally on you, but I think that would be our recommendation, or at least my recommendation. I think everybody probably would agree with that. I can speak a little bit on the human involvement as far as that detriment to the species and stuff. And I know only a few units. I mean, all of the units have infrastructure that have, whether it be power lines or roads and things like that. I don't know if it's a huge limiting factor in majority of them, other than 21 and 22, being really close to Reno there. However, I do think that whenever projects go through, whether it's an NDOT project or a Caltrans project or an NV Energy project or any type of infrastructure project, NDOW has always been very involved with that, and I'm certain with CDFW as well. But I really think that we miss a lot of times opportunities to jump on mitigation that these deeper pockets, whether it be power companies or transportation organizations, I think we miss the mitigation windows sometimes on those projects. And so that's where I think those are definite things that we should be thinking about, whether we have a project involved or it's just looking down the road that we have some sort of trigger. If a project does happen, that these are the types of mitigation projects we should be pursuing and really should be pushing at the local and the federal level. And without seeing how I rank things, I wasn't sure. I know there was a couple of them that I didn't have really good familiarity with. So I don't know, John, if you wanted to pull up my sheet there. I think I had some notes in there.
Yeah, is it still? Oh, so I took the side notes out.
Okay.
But I left your question marks here. So you had that for disease, you left blank, and then others, you had that. I can pull up that email.
Let's see here. And then the human cause mortality, which was above predation, I really don't, I mean, that's something that, how much poaching do we actually have occur that we know of in these units? And so I guess that would be a game warden question. And I'm sure you guys have that data, but I just kind of ranked that average. I almost just put zeros for it because I just didn't.
How much is it?
I thought collisions probably with vehicles is much higher than any type of poaching, but that would probably be a question for game
Wardens.
Yeah, and I think that's it. Yeah, I talked to the whole group. I'm sorry I missed that meeting, and I'm sorry I'm gonna have to drop off here any second now. I'm just waiting for a ride. So, but yeah, I do think, from my perspective, there's a lot of opportunities. I just think as far as the follow-up and monitoring, we should be, if we are planning on putting a ton of collars out there, should be putting them in places that make sense. And I'm sure you guys are aware of that.
Yeah, so I think our current thinking was that we were going to try and stratify. Okay, here you go, Dan. Here's your actual sheet with the writing on it. So you had tough to gauge for shrub senescence,
Oh, yeah.
and then not enough information for disease. But in terms of the collars, I think we're gonna try and stratify those to kind of have them like evenly distributed from, basically all of the units in management area 1, and then 022, 021, and 033. So basically, all of the units that we're talking about for this, we're gonna try and like stratify collars throughout that, kind of go hand in hand with that project 46 that's going on.
Sounds good. The other up, from BLM's terms, is we do have a couple gathers. So one in the 11, 12, 13, 14 units, and then one in 015. And they're planning, I believe, an emergency gather in 021 as well. If we get collars out and it's in some of those areas, it would be really interesting. Not only the collar data, but then also some camera data on springs would be really interesting to see after a substantial amount of horses are removed. So that's another thing to think about. And I think I touched on that a little bit earlier. The shrub, what was it? Shrub senescence.
Yeah,
And so I'm guessing that's like the nutrition and the palatability for shrubs. Is that correct?
correct. Yeah, some of those older ones.
Yeah. And so I'm not sure, like looking at our intact habitat in our region. So like 014 is a good example that has a lot of really good habitat. Is that habitat is it too old, or is it palatable? Not, is it lost its palatability or nutrition level in that unit? So that'd be something that's way beyond, I think, our committee's head, and to be able to know, how an older shrub, how a mule deer digests that versus something that's a few. So that was my one. I couldn't really gauge to rank if that's like if we're sitting good or bad. I mean, we have units that have completely burned majority of the unit, and so are those things in a couple years going to have better shrub palatability than a unit like 014 that has some really old growth sage and bitter brush and places like that. So and I think that's all.
Okay. Does the rest of the subcommittee want to weigh in on anything that he said, or you guys good on that?
I'm fine with it.
Good.
I think good comments.
Awesome. Well, sorry again, guys, and I'm going to hop off right now. But yeah, really appreciate it. And yeah, I'll let
Safe.
y'all know how things go.
Good luck.
Good
Thanks,
luck.
Dan.
Yeah.
Good luck, Dan.
I know. Sean, do you know when you guys are wanting to put those collars out? Or
So yeah, we're trying to put them out in the fall.
this okay.
We were thinking about, it'd be after the hunt season, so we're not boogering anything up like that, but we're looking at, kind of late fall to early winter. It's all up in the air with the contracting right now.
Okay, that just gives us an idea of timing, so we can find the rest of the funding so we can hang more collars.
Right, and another potential issue with that is the Vectronic collars are made over in Germany. So typically there's a little bit of a turnaround time from, when we decide that we have, 50 grand to go buy collars, to when those collars are in our hand and we can actually go out and hang them on deer.
Okay, so sooner the better.
Yep.
Okay.
Arnie, did you have a question?
Hey, quick question, Member Pitts. Did you, and maybe I missed it, but did you guys fill out any of these, some of the people in the department, to see if there were similar concerns amongst you guys as there was amongst the committee members, and how closely that was?
Yeah, so Mark and I both filled out these same sheets. And And then we took all those and averaged it. So if you look at these averages, and then you can like kind of compare it to your sheet and see like, you know, just how much you differed from the rest of the group. But basically it's just a straight average of every one of the subcommittee members put on here. I can't make it fit all the way on the screen, so I can scroll up or down depending on where you guys want it.
Did it seem like people had similar concerns? I mean, was it pretty correlated, consistent, or were they all over the board?
Yeah, it was, to be honest, there was definitely a similarity with a lot of people putting question marks for disease. And then to be completely transparent, with not having my hands on those until today, I was very much rushed to kind of throw all those into an Excel sheet.
Yeah, I bet. Sorry about that.
Oh, no, I'm not throwing shade at anyone on that. I'm just saying I didn't really have time to sit there and go through and see how people ranked each one.
Right.
This is just kind of the summary of what everyone felt.
So John, Steve Robinson, what is the top few highest priorities on the limiting factors?
So
What did the group come up as is this is what we have to look at?
okay, and do you want to go through this by unit or just kind of by topic? Because, you know, looking at this right here, like just for fire, 021 and 022 had that ranked as a 5 compared to, you know, the other units were a little lower. 015 had it as a 4, so still pretty high. For the invasive or noxious weeds, 015 had a 4, and 022 and 021 had it as a 5. And basically, do you want me just to kind of go through and hit the 5s where the group kind of universally did it pretty
I think it's a
high?
good way to do it.
So for the next one is improper grazing, wild horses, 021, 022, 015, 014, and 011 to 013, all ranked high. The Sheldon's the only one that didn't rank that high. You got a couple of 4s for improper livestock grazing, 021 and 022, as well as 011 to 013. Scrolling down here.
Climate.
The next 4 that I'm seeing, actually, I lied. The next 4 for inadequate migration corridor, 021 and 022 had a 4, as well as 015 had a 4. And after that, off-road vehicle use had a 4 for 01 or 021 and 022. Everything's ranking pretty low. For urban development, that one received a 5 for the ranking of it. So in 021 and 022, which is definitely seeing a lot of development in it. Scrolling down here, predation. Yeah, so with disease, what Rex is pointing out here is disease has a divided by 0.
What's predation?
Zeros and.
Yeah,
014,
so that one,
015.
let me look at the formula on that. Because that one, I'm sure they're not zeros there.
It should be.
Yeah, those
Mine were all 5s.
Okay, so I'll go through.
1 or 5s.
predation's got to be all 5s, I think.
Yeah, so some of the units, I don't know why these showed up as a 0. Something's wrong with this formula.
We're just divided by.
I think it's probably the zeros in there if somebody didn't fill out that section. But anyways, yes, predation was ranked high across every single one of those units. I don't know that they were all 5s, but they were all, you know, ranked highly. The disease, that one, it's got the divided by 0 because people put question marks and stuff in there. Conflicts with laws and policies. So this one, 4 of the members put it in there as a 5, and then some people did not respond to that question. So it's counting, it's not actually taking those zeros into account, but for those of you who had like, I think Larry had written in 2 comments for that, one being an issue right here, an issue with the lack of wild horse and burrow management right here. And then NDOW's reluctance for predator management is what he put for the conflicts with policies and regulations. And then for the last one here, we had some zeros as well for the other, but for those that did put something in there, I think Larry as well had put that for the other wild horse competition. Another one that had an other, which I had forgot to mention, is Joe's. For his other, right here, he had put anti-hunting groups and horse groups. He'd ranked as a 5 across the board. So that might be a talking point for us. And did anyone else write anything in for other that I somehow missed?
I think I just put something about the horses, not necessarily overgrazing, but damaging water sources.
Okay. And Arnie, I don't know if I have any comments.
I also had another I just wrote under staffing for NDOW, just listening to Mark talk about how thin he's stretched and how little help he gets and everything else. And I know how much you have on your plate and how big Northern Washoe is. I don't know how many technicians you have, how much help you have, but it just seems like, yeah, exactly. So I think that's up there too. Just with your guys' help. That's why I'm kind of trying to get more volunteer help for projects and whatever else. But I had that as another other for I have it under the lower other at the bottom.
Okay. So Steve, with those 5s that are 5s or 4s that we kind of went over, do any of you, like feel super strongly about any of those that didn't come out as a 5 or a 4 that you think should be, talked about more? Or are you guys with kind of the average that we came up with here for each of those units?
Now, this is Steve Robinson. That, looking at our averages, it looks like the group as a whole has a consensus that wild horses is a big problem, predation is a big problem, and the department's policies are a big problem. That looks like the 3 big points from the consensus.
And I would probably twist that a little bit, Steve, and saying that it is national policy, Congress, BLM, as far as lack of wild horse management that has gotten us into a very bad condition. And that's kind of beyond NDOW's, control, with the exception that I still want the state to sue the federal government over wild horse management. But and my listing of wild horse competition, I've felt the up under habitat, the improper grazing by wild horses is just one small piece of the total picture, simply because wild horses seriously outcompete wildlife at water sources. I mean, we've all seen horses guard springs, chase antelope, chase elk. The other part that most people, I don't think, truly recognize is the fact that smaller animals are just intimidated by larger animals and don't want to be around. So where you have an overpopulation of wild horses, it purely displaces the natural wildlife, not just by overgrazing, not just by monopolizing water sources, but just by intimidation. And I think that is tremendously underestimated in the impacts of large animals on smaller animals. I think studies have shown that occurs with elk and deer. I think the same studies have shown this, the same issue has occurred between cattle and elk. And I infer from that that it would be that deer versus an animal as large as wild horses, there's purely an intimidation factor there that they don't want to be around them. That's all. So I cannot, at this point, I can't stress enough 5.0s when it comes to wild horses.
Member Pitts has a question.
Go ahead,
Are
Nick.
we gonna take this out and see if the public has any comment at any point during this?
Yeah, so I figured we'd talk through the limiting factor sheet and then kick it out and have public comment on the limiting factor sheet portion of it. And then come back, and if we're gonna, work through the mule deer needs assessment, we'll do that as a group, and then same thing, kick it back out to the public. And then at the very end, there's a section that's just general public comment.
Okay.
But yeah, I figured, whenever you guys are, I figured I'd kind of wait for it to organically conclude before we kick it out to the public.
Larry Johnson, my other very strong feelings on our very low mule deer populations is predation. And I have stated in previous meetings that that was my feeling. And the facts that I believe we have more mountain lions in Western Nevada than any time in history. And since our last meeting, I've had conversations with ex-director of Department of Wildlife, Willie Mullaney, who was an area biologist for Washoe County early in his career. He spent 4 years in that position. And number one, not only did he never see a mountain lion or a mountain lion kill, he never saw a mountain lion track in all of that time that he spent in Washoe County. The other kind of anecdotal type comment from him was that in contrast to this year, where a helicopter survey in area 14 could only find 30 mule deer, that in his days as a biologist, he would count in excess of 300 animals from the ground. I'm oranges and apples. I mean, we're in a terrible, terrible condition. Something drastic has happened to us. And what has happened to us to get us in this hole? And how remotely can we dig our way out? Silence.
You're on mute, John.
Yeah, I mean, that's the $1 million question, is how do we fix this? So
How do we get here?
how did we get here?
How do we get here and what do we do about it? Yeah.
I mean, I'm not entirely sure, how the mule deer populations got to where they're at, but in terms of how do we fix it, I'm hoping that that's, what the limiting factor worksheet can kind of, if we can all agree on something, then hopefully we can all agree that doing anything there is gonna, hopefully help out the mule deer in North Washoe. I don't know that, kind of like you'd said in that first meeting, Larry, I don't know that there's one silver bullet. I think we got to do a whole magnitude of stuff, do a bunch of different projects. And I don't know that it's any one thing that's led to their decline as much as it is a combination of it. So, we can't fix just one thing and expect it to come back. I think we got to kind of take it on from a bunch of approaches.
Yeah. I agree.
Okay. In terms of like the limiting factor sheet, do any of you guys, do you want to, add anything else to it, or do you want to kick it out to public comment?
Public comment. Yeah.
Okay. So now, we'll take a few minutes here and open it up to public comment. We can have attendees raise their hand if they're on Zoom, or if people who are here present have anything that they want to add, then we will give them some time. Hold on one second. I can't make this full screen to see the people. Cooper or Cassandra, can you see the attendees to see what's going on?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Cooper.
Cassandra, could you come in here for a second? I can't get it to go back full screen. It's frozen. Oh, it's because I'm sharing my screen. Got it. Never mind. It was because I was sharing the screen. Okay, now I can see the attendees. Thus far, it doesn't look like anyone has raised their hand. Rex, do you have any comments? So
Yes, I do.
We'll open it up to Rex Flowers.
Rex Flowers for the record. I think with the, with BLM doing the gathers, I think there should be a concentration, maybe working on a multi-point deal, such as doing a couple of spring fencings in areas where the horses are being removed to protect those, but at the same time coming forward with some sort of predation projects in those same areas to allow for those animals coming in to gather water, to do it in a way that they don't end up becoming another meal. Washoe, the state of Nevada, since 2012, has lost 25% of its mule deer herd. Washoe County in areas 1, area 2, and unit 033 has lost 39% of its mule deer herds. So it's something that can't be fixed overnight. I think we have to have projects that work in unison. We have tons of habitat projects going on, as much as the department and BLM can handle at this time. So I think it's a waste of time to keep throwing money there when they can't do any more than what they're doing. I think maybe some water conservation or water entrapment sources, but and then with the short-term predation projects, and I know that's going to go against the grain with many within the department. I've talked to a number of individuals in management department who acknowledge that areas like 014 definitely have a predator problem, but they also want to look at other things in there. There's, nothing wrong with looking at the other things as long as we do some of what we really need. Short term is we need the predator projects. That's just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Rex. And one of the attendees has their hand raised. Oh, 2 of their attendees.
I put in Joel Blakesley. Hopefully he'll be able to talk. Let's see.
Joel, you can unmute yourself.
Good, I got you. How's that?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah.
You can hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so what have I got, 2 minutes? I'd just like to say that habitat's wonderful, but it's long-term. And frankly, what good's a barn full of hay if you don't have any cows? What I would like to talk to is lions. I know quite a bit about them. Can you see this book?
Your video is not on.
Okay, here's video.
There you go.
This
Yep.
book, Mammals of Nevada by E. Raymond Hall, University of California Press, printed in 1946. This is a distribution map right here of the lions in Nevada. It doesn't even show that lions existed in Western Nevada in 1946. In 1985, when I moved to Reno, there were 3 lion tags in Washoe County. Now there's 3 lions behind every bush. When I first started trapping in northern Washoe, I trapped Poodle Mountain, the Buckhorn, all that North Country. Tony Diebold was kind of the resident trapper up there. He caught 100 cats a couple of different years. Never caught a lion in his entire career. And bobcats, exactly. He never caught a lion. And I remember we saw a track on Burnt Lake one day, and he says, "My God," he said, he said, "that'd be interesting to catch that. And you've got a bunch of them." I said, "Shit, I don't want him." But anyway, UNR did a porcupine study and determined that the lions have wiped the porcupines out. How far of a reach is it to say that they haven't wiped the deer out too? I mean, I don't agree with spreading ourselves out on a whole bunch of things. I would forget about habitat until you got the predator thing under control, because, and wild horses, obviously, but what are you going to do about them? The problem we have here is political correctness. And if we can't get through that, then really meetings like this are kind of a waste, in my opinion. So I would talk about predation and horses. And the other thing is that was correctly identified was the politics of the anti-hunters and trappers, because they are the reason we're not dealing with horses and predators. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Joel. Okay. The other person with their hand raised is Mel Belding.
How y'all doing?
Excellent.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, Mel Belding for the record. First of all, I would like to thank this committee that spoke up and were able to convince those in charge to take a more in-depth look at the problems facing our deer herd and to discuss some of the possible remedies. To think that holding one introduction meeting of the status and a single field trip to a very small piece of the units, I believe that was ill-conceived method. And to choose a predetermined project without any input from this subcommittee or concerned sportsmen and women, I think it was just unjust. And I want to thank you guys for sending this along a little further. And maybe it's not time for the next meeting. Maybe we need a couple of these things to happen. Maybe we need to go look at some things that we can do to help these along. With that, I agree wholeheartedly with what has been said about feral horses, predation, and what has happened in Washoe County over the years. In 1973, I was involved with my brother-in-law, who was very good friends with Tony DeBold. He was 130, 150 cat man a year, bobcat. I was with him for 4 years, learning how to do things. And I can honestly tell you, he never hung a mountain lion in any part of northern Washoe, not one part. Even the buffaloes clear to the Sheldon, the Oregon border, California border, clear over towards Winnemucca, they just weren't there. Now it's a different story. And if we do not have the intestinal fortitude to take on who it's going to take, that we have to take on, and if we think we are going to go somewhere without taking on the predators, I don't think we're going to have a chance in hell of getting these deer back. And we need augmentation, guys. And I believe that a limiting factor would be not to augment these herds. We need to look at a lot of things, but immediately there's only so many things we can do. We can't make it rain, but we can produce water for these guys. We can improve these springs. We can improve meadows. There's lots of things we can do, but we can't make it rain. So I like what I heard tonight as far as feral horses and predators. Some of the projects that we'd like, that I'd like to see. We need to thin some of this old decadent brush. We need to make room for other plants to grow. The same one, we've got places in 014 that we could trim some things, and they're going to drop some seeds, and we can grow some more. But short term is really what we need to be looking at here also, and augmentation is very, very important in that short term. Just a question, John, you mentioned that there's going to be 2 more times we're able to speak, or is that second, you said one other time or something else, and then we got public comment. So there's other things that need to be brought up that I would like to bring up and I would like discussed, but I would like to hear this committee discuss augmentation. Larry Johnson mentioned Willie Malini. I turned in jaws to Willie Malini when he was the predator biologist in the 70s, in the late 70s. And we've had numerous discussions about mountain lions and bobcats since then and then. But, seeing 30 mule deer in 014 is very, very concerning. And 033 is not far behind. I just want to stress again, you don't have feral horse numbers in the Sheldon anymore. You haven't had them there for nearly a decade, and they're not responding as well as what we thought was going to happen. There's a missing element there, and we all know what it is. So thanks again, guys, for listening and making this thing go on maybe a little bit longer so we can get to the nuts and bolts. That's it.
Okay. Thank you, Mel. And yeah, just to reiterate that, everyone has 3 minutes apiece to come at the end of the mule deer needs assessment. You'll have like another opportunity for the public to weigh in and comment. And then at the end, the very last agenda item is going to be public comment. So there's just a general public comment time where it'll be open for the public to comment on whatever they want. So with that, I guess I'll open it to the subcommittee to talk about the mule deer needs assessment form. And I can open a blank one of those and we can kind of talk through it. Since I think Dan and Mark are the only ones that I received completed ones of those from, which is totally okay. You know, we can talk through that now. If I could find it. Let's see. Oh, that one's.
Hey, John.
Yep.
This is Joe Zweifel. To actually talk about what Mel just said, he wants us to talk about deer augmentation, and we can later, I mean, right at the end, but while you're bringing this up, I just wanted to bring up, is that something you can get back to us on as to why it's so apprehensive not to move deer? And we hear disease, we hear all that stuff. I get it, but you can also test for it, correct? Before you release them. And I do feel in some areas it may be the only way to get these populations going again, as low as the numbers are. Like it's the same. I mean, we do it for fish, we do it for birds, we do it for antelope, we do it for sheep, we do it for elk, everything. We haven't done it for deer. And with the deer in peril as they are, I don't see why that's not something we should not look at. So is that something you can get back to us on? There's a couple things I'd like to, sometimes we ask questions and they go to, hey, that's a Cody Shorter question, that's a so-and-so question, but we never hear back. That's one I'd like to hear back on for sure. And if it's like, hey, we can't do that, we kind of need to know why, and or if there's other ways we can. I know it's easier grabbing them from private. So is that something we can look at? If we can get them off of private areas and then move them up? Do we have to move them up to private again? Is that like a kind of a loophole we can go through? Or these are just kind of things I'm trying to think about of easier methods of take and release.
Okay.
We could do needs assessment. I just wanted to.
No. Yeah, I mean, just off the cuff, disease was going to be, you know, my response to as to why we don't move deer around the state. But in terms of, you know, getting an exact reason of why not, I will ask the higher ups unless they, you know, want to weigh in on it right now. But, you know, that's not something that I could give you an answer of like my opinion of why it can or can't be done. That's something that has to come from within the game division. But yeah, if they don't want to weigh in on it now, then down the road, you know, you have my word that I will get you an answer to whether augmentation is an option or not, and why, the reasoning for it.
Thank you.
This is Steve Robinson. Could Cooper weigh in on that right now? So as we go forward,
I'm gonna not weigh in on that right now, just because I don't have all the facts at my fingertips. You know, we resist moving cervids due to the potential for chronic wasting disease right now. But you know, we're not letting other people rehab mule deer, so we're kind of in a conundrum right now and trying to figure out where this would all fit within that and what disease testing is available. You know, we can't currently test for chronic wasting disease, and you know, on a live deer. That has to be, you know, a dead deer to actually test for chronic wasting disease. So, you know, I won't respond any further until we get a little bit of clarity internally. So.
Yeah, I'd like to weigh in on CWD. I know you guys collect a lot of samples, and a lot of them we give you guys from deer that come in from all over the state, and it's 0% of CWD over years and years of checking. So if that's the case, and with the deer population as low as it is, I find that kind of a cop out, I feel. And if we don't do something, I think it's a lot more critical than we're kind of hearing back from the department. It doesn't feel as as critical as it is, I just, there needs to be a lot more done right now. And another thing too, I don't understand how it got to this point and how we just still have zero idea of how it got to this point and what we should do now. It's kind of scary, but.
Yeah, and I don't disagree. And I would, like I said, I would prefer to talk with staff specialists and the chief of game prior to, potentially relaying any false information or anything like that. So.
Gotcha.
Thank you, Cooper.
Yep.
All right. Anything else on that, or do you guys want to look at the mule deer needs assessment?
Let's look at it.
No, that sounds good.
So, let's see here. Share my screen again. So same thing for this. Initially, it wasn't broken out into these unit groups, but it's separated now so that we can kind of work through that based on each unit's differences. So on the left, we have wildfire and invasives, but basically how the sheet is broken down is you have those limiting factors. And, basically if on that sheet, we determine that something was a limiting factor, then we can go in and look at some of the possible management actions to try and improve on that limiting factor. So, I think we ranked wildfires and invasives as 5s for, I believe it was 022 and 021. So for that, we could take a look at this one and try and see, which one of these we thought would be a good idea. And kind of work through it that way. And, for some of these, I'm probably going to lean a little bit more on Mark, because in terms of the differences between, the advantages of each of these habitat manipulations, that's definitely more Mark's specialty than mine. But do you guys how do you want to work through this? Do you want to go through it by each of these limiting factors and then pick out, which ones you think is the best strategy? Or do you want to just go through and fill out the entire thing, each one of these boxes?
Well, Steve Robinson, I think we just do the wildfire and invasive, just do the groups. And, since you have Mark here, too bad Dan had to leave, but see what they feel is the best.
Okay.
For the, the planting and the growing the habitat. They're the experts in that.
Yeah, this is Mark. I'll just weigh in here. I did find it a little bit difficult to just fill these out and give it a value rating without having a specific piece of ground to look at, because it's going to vary. So that certainly is challenging. You guys all know, wildfire and invasives are a big issue across the state. And being from Habitat Division, I kind of bleed this stuff. So I do think there's opportunity in several of these units. It's all going to depend upon kind of the site specific need assessment for a piece. So it does become a little challenging, just throwing out numbers and filling it out. I think maybe John's suggestion of like taking all those higher ranked ones from the limiting factor, then we could start to hone kind of what it is we're looking at in each one of those. And that may be a effective path forward.
Okay. So from the group's average of limiting factors, let's see. So population had a 5 in it. Habitat or population had a couple of 5s and a 4 in it. Habitat had a couple of 5s in it. So then moving forward with that sheet, let's see where those 5s were. So 015 and 021 and 022 for fire. as well as noxious weeds ranked high. So that's that first category. So if you want, we can kind of just go based off of that and kind of bring it through each one by one. So then if we move over to, wrong one, this, wildfire and invasives, here are the things that we can do as a management tool to try and kind of correct some of that. So then Mark, for 015, as well as 021 and 022, specifically, do you think that just over in this next block of management action, do you think that planning, herbicide, or fuels management, any one of those are going to be more advantageous for those 3 units?
Yeah, for fuels management, I do think there's probably some added value in like a better green strip along 395 on the west side of the Petersons. I would see that being a good potential project. 015 is really a difficult area to work in, just given logistical constraints, terrain constraints, low resistance resilience. The BLM has been doing a good job in getting some herbicide. They've got another 7,000 acres they're planning on treating this fall. So there may be some opportunity to potentially seed behind their green strip. And then some of even North Washoe, I think just the fire potential exists, right? We've got a lot of shrub senescent communities. We got a lot of area that's pretty intact. It's missing understory, but you could have a very large wildfire in North Washoe. And I think fuel breaks would be a particularly effective way to help break up the landscape, keep those fires to a manageable size.
Okay, so you're talking 011 to 013.
Yep, for some of the fuel break potentials. And we are currently working with Carson City BLM in 022, excuse me, on the Virginia Mountains green strip.
Okay. Okay, and then in terms of the invasive side of it, as opposed to just the wildfire side of it,
I do think there's opportunity to do some herbicide and potentially seeding. I think that what would be particularly helpful is some of the collar data, right? And maybe that's something we could work through and present if this group wanted to pursue that. But looking at some of the collar data, focus our efforts where it's going to be most meaningful.
okay. And then how do you guys want to take this? Do you each want to weigh in on this with each of these ones that we're ranking highly, or?
Remember, I had another quick question for Mark. Is there a standard when we have a fire like in 015 or 021 and 022 that you do a certain order, you do things, and is it very similar for each fire, or is it different for each area, the way you manage that ground?
It can be different, but we do a lot of kind of standard practices, right, in a given landscape. So we're constrained with what's on the landscape. So we'll go out there following a wildfire, do kind of a basic assessment. Is there the plants we want on site? Is it going to respond on its own? If not, what do we need to get on that landscape? And are we going to be dealing with cheatgrass competition, right? So a lot of times if we have the cheatgrass threat, we're going to try and put down an herbicide similar to what we saw in Poodle Fire to eliminate that cheatgrass competition, and then come back the following year and seed with those species that are desirable from kind of a range health standpoint, going to help provide some resistance and resilience into the future, but also provide the food and cover needed for the wildlife we're managing.
Thank you.
I have something to say. This is Joe Zweifel. Larry and I would like Mark Freese to fill out our form. I mean, a serious no kidding aside, on that field trip, Mark had such a good grasp over what's happening, what's going on with fires, reseeding, fire breaks, where they're needed, what seeds work where well with what soils and climates, and because the areas are so different, elevations are different. This sheet is really hard to fill out, but I do feel Mark has, and Dan, they have such a grasp on what's going on and what could benefit and how, and they could kind of give us a list of habitats of like prioritize it. We would back them 100%. That's for Larry and I know that. It's just, we're looking at this and it's tough for us to fill out. And like Mark said, each unit's difficult from fires and again, just elevation and everything. But that field trip really opened our eyes on the grasp they have on habitat and what they're doing. And it's an incredible job. So I would suggest Mark fill out my sheet and I will sign off on it. Is that okay, Mark?
Or you put it up and we'll adopt it.
Yeah.
I appreciate those kind words, Joe. And when I filled it out, like I said, it was very tough and I just filled it out shooting kind of from the hip, but without knowing exactly where a treatment's going on the ground. It's really tough to say we need planting or we need herbicide or we need this, right? We could kick out, probably provide a list of opportunities and potential habitat type projects. I know we talked about some of the spring protection enhancement work. I think there's some probably strategic fuels type projects, like on the west side of the Petersons, get a better green strip on there because we do see a lot of fire starts off of 395. Also think North Washoe, we're one big burn away from losing a lot of country up there. Breaking up that landscape would be very helpful for fire suppression and our ability to come back and rehabilitate, a much smaller landscape.
Well, Mark, this is Larry. You kind of reinforced our conclusion because you are the expert and the professional in the field. Compared to you, we're kind of rank laymen. And if this is difficult for you to fill out with any degree of accuracy, it is impossible for us to do so. So we need to lean on the professionals here and follow your lead. And I would suggest that this committee take the average of Mark and Dan's assessment scores and we adopt those.
I would second that.
Steve?
I third it.
Arnie?
It seems like I'm definitely not an expert on this. It seems like we got to in some of these areas where there are not lack of food where we can make a difference. It seems like those would be great projects to go. Some of the things that we heard, we just have to focus on predators and horses. I think that's true, but we've got to take care of some of these other needs and to understand them so we can make projects that work towards this, I think is really important as well. The page 2 of this does take into consideration some of the predation priorities, and too, we should probably look at some of that stuff maybe on page 2 ourselves.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, this is Steve Robinson. And Mark, I really appreciated you at the field trip we had, and had a new appreciation of what you're doing up there, you and Dan, and the knowledge and what you're doing. It doesn't sound like it's a lack of willingness or lack of funding that's stopping you from doing everything you need to do. I think you keep running as far as you can with this, with whatever projects you need, like the green strips in 013 that you wanted to do. And I know that's maybe controversial with some of the department, but to prevent a future giant forest fire up there, or sagebrush fire actually, would be fantastic. But it sounds like you guys have some great projects and great ideas. It's just a matter of time and staffing, and that's it.
It seems to me these are some places too where we can get some of the groups to put forward maybe some extra manpower to help and funding as well. I think some of the coalitions and other groups would be very interested in diving into some of this stuff.
Yeah, and certainly from our perspective, we can certainly put together a little more refined list of potential habitat projects. We talked about one in particular that's coming up with fencing a bunch of springs in North Washoe. But if the committee wishes, we certainly can provide, a whole other list of potential projects and get those aligned. We are continuing to press forward with a lot of our partners, and it gets complicated with NEPA permitting. And some of them aren't certainly going to be right, but we'll push them through those permitting and start funding them. I would say you guys have the opportunity to help, direct some funds through this program towards these projects if you would like. And that would certainly help those projects get off the ground and move a little bit quicker where they are right.
Mark, this is Steve Robinson. You discussed that the NEPA process on some of those springs is going to take a few years, a couple years at least. What Dan was mentioning, Indian Spring enhancement, since it's private property, is that something that we could just get going quickly?
Yes, and there are a number. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, there are a number of private ones we're working on up there. We just got 3 contractors on board, or will be on board in September. So that'll be a big help in kind of why those haven't quite got off the ground. And actually, it's a pretty new opportunity. We do have some contracts we're trying to get issued, and so they could be constructed next summer and fall. So those ones are ripe. Some of them are in private. The BLM also out of Applegate Field Office in Eagle Lake has a programmatic riparian EA, and they've got some of the major NEPA clearances already in place. They just have to do some minor modifications, cultural clearances. So those can actually move pretty quickly in that part of the world. When we go on to the Carson BLM district or Winnemucca, that's a whole nother bottle of wax, and that's several years out.
Okay. Really what I would want from you, Mark, is just your top 3. This is what we need to do quickly that's going to really help mule deer out. And you know what those are. Let's get it done.
That, and John, can you explain kind of exactly what proposals were? It's 3. I mean, can we like teardrop those and like we're gonna do a bunch of springs, or is it like one spring? Is it if we do water? You know what I mean? I'm just kind of trying to figure out what we can propose, and can you outline that kind of better?
Yeah, absolutely. So for spring enhancement, it's just kind of a limitation of like, how many springs we can like afford to go out and fence, and then once again the manpower for it. A lot of it's going to be contracted out. So I think I'd spoke with Mark, and I think he said 5 would be ideal. So like for a habitat improvement proposal, we could put forth, that we want to secure funding to go out and contract the fencing of 5 springs. And I think that's doable. And Dan had kind of alluded to it in that email that he sent to the group, but there are some springs that are on private property that are in some quality mule deer habitat that we can go out and protect. And those, Mark can probably talk a little bit more about like where those are. I don't necessarily have a map or anything, but here's an example, and this is super small, but on the field trip, I passed out some of these like habitat proposal forms. So here's kind of an idea of what that would look like. You can see, within it, it doesn't say that it has to just be, one single spring. The limiting factor for it's going to be the cost. And then does that kind of answer your question, or did you want more clarity? And this is the habitat form. There's also the predator or the non-habitat form.
We're still seeing your mule deer needs assessment, John.
Dang it. Okay.
Yeah, Mark, I have just a basic question to you. On the field trip, you, I think either stated or implied that you were tapped out as far as manpower, that you had sufficient funding for projects. What you were lacking were people to administer contracts, et cetera, put the contracts together and administer the contracts. So my question to you is should we even be advancing additional habitat projects if you cannot put them together and administrate them? Are you having sufficient funds without this process? That's my question.
Yeah, Larry, that's a good question. I'd say in general, we are running up against some capacity limitations. I would say this mule deer group, if they wanted to support like some spring enhancement projects, we could likely go from 1 or 2 spring enhancements per year to closer to 5, like John said, without adding too much additional burden as far as capacity. Administer 5 projects versus 2 is a very little incremental increase. It helps us streamline our process and make us a little bit more efficient. Tori Cernoff, who's the endowed NRCS shared biologist position, is actually taking the lead on some of the North Washoe spring enhancement projects. And we haven't even been to all the sites, assess the needs, know where these projects are gonna fall out in terms of priorities, or know where the potential fences. So that's something we're gonna be doing this fall, and working on getting some of those packaged up and be able to bid those and contract those next summer. So I think there could be a difference that this group makes, and instead of doing 2, which we might be limited by funding, your guys' support and contribution, if we did get heritage funding, could increase our capacity there.
Great, thank you for that clarification. Well, John, at this point, I think we have fairly well said that the first page of the needs assessment, we want to rely on Mark and Dan's expertise. Can we move on to the second page of that?
So you guys had put forth a motion and that was seconded, but anyone who's opposed to that, or actually, sorry, I did that out of order. Everyone who's in favor of that, we have to take a vote.
Aye.
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 Okay, anyone opposed? Okay. And so Mark, as long as you're comfortable with it, I have your mule needs assessment here. I can just open that and share that, and if you want, we can go through that.
Or move on. Yeah.
I think so. You can share that. That's fine with me. Like I said, it was kind of a shot from the hip. But I think the group wanted us to pick, say, 3 to 5 different kind of habitat projects and kind of focus on those.
Okay.
And we would be happy to come up with those, what we think are the top ones, and kick them out and have that discussion. So that may be more valuable than trying to sort through my mess.
Okay.
I think so. I agree.
Okay. Okay. So then we can move on to, you want to look at the second page of this, or where are you guys at with the mule deer needs assessment.
Yeah, let's do page 2.
Oh, here, I'll bring up a blank one. Sorry.
Stands. I was gonna go 0. 0.
And are you guys seeing the second page now on my shared screen, or is it still?
Nope.
No,
Huh. Okay, I'll stop and start sharing again. How about now?
yep.
Okay.
Yep, we got it.
Okay, so then we can go through and kind of do the same thing where we're looking at whatever the potential limiting factor is in the column on the left and see if we had any 5s or 4s based on the limiting factor sheet. So scrolling down here, out of the habitat stuff. Okay, so within habitat or population, we had, let's see, the first 4 was for off-road vehicle use in 022 and 021. I'm just writing this down so I have it separately. Let's see. Then the next value that we had was we had a 5 in urban development for 021, 022. And then, let's see.
Where's the
Then the next one is going to be in predation, and that was, ranked highly across the board. Okay, and then conflicts with laws and policies was the next 5 in the last 5 that we had.
No, you're on limiting factors.
Right, so I was identifying which limiting factor
Okay.
you ranked high, and then we can look at this limiting factor sheet to see what some of the potential things that we can do about it. So for lack of connectivity, we didn't have, anything necessarily identified there. I would assume that the off-road use as well as the urban development is going to impact the connectivity. So, in terms of 021 to 022, are there any of these that we think would improve that the development or the off-road use within those 2 units?
I'm intrigued about wildlife crossings. It seems like there could be some of that possibly for anything just along 395 or other highways where deer are crossing. I don't know if we have too many of those in those areas.
So they've identified on the California side, they've identified some under crossings, and they're putting a bunch of cameras on it to see like which ones the deer are actually using. And there's a bunch of exclusion fences that they have on it to try and keep the highway to funnel them to those under crossings. And then once they identify ones that could be, used more frequently by wildlife, then I think there was potential plans to try and improve that. But once again, all that's, pending funding. They're just doing a study to identify the under crossings that we have that they're utilizing. So could be something that we could piggyback off of.
That seems cool.
This is Steve Robinson. I think on my list, I put migration corridors as being important in all the areas. Better knowledge of the migration corridors and protecting those from, any development that we can. That seems to be a huge limiting factor in some areas.
Okay. So not just specifically 021 and 022, but all the way up to North Washoe?
Anywhere that we're developing land where deer are migrating in. I think that's something we need to look at and identify a little better. And it's actually more, some of Washoe County, you know, closer to Reno is a much bigger problem. I guess we're not tasked with looking at all of Washoe County, but I think it's an important factor that we really need to look at. Whether there's a project, they just have to identify those areas and protect those at all costs.
Okay. So I put marks in there for all 5 of those units for migration corridor, and then for wildlife crossings, I put it specifically for 021 and 022. Did you guys think any of the other units may benefit from a wildlife crossing, or that's specific to that unit?
I think it's specific.
Okay. All right, then moving on to the next one, predation, we ranked highly for all of the units. So with this, there's coyote removal, lion removal, camera grid, predator research, or a deer collaring study. So out of those, you know, which direction would you guys like to go for each of these units in terms of like what you feel is important?
Coyote removal, mountain lion removal, and deer collaring
In all areas.
in all areas.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that as well.
And do we use some of the BLM's trail camera information? Do we take advantage of what they find with that stuff?
Yeah, so it's tough when they have however many thousand photos, you know, like they're not gonna just like give us all those photos through email or something like that. But basically, they'll give us kind of results of what they find in that. And then we can kind of make recommendations moving forward based on, you know, if they have cameras on a water source or something like that, and you see that there's, you know, way more horses than there is wildlife utilizing it, then we could definitely capitalize on that and, you know, prioritize as a spring that we want to work on. Then we just got to get around, you know, figuring out whether we have an EA in place, like one of those programmatic EAs like Mark was talking about, where we can go in and do work there.
Is that this is Joe's Weeful, is that something else we can get, you can look into, is seeing if BLM is finishing up those all those photos, and then if they're gonna send you guys what their assessment is, so you guys can kind of look into it, because it sounds like they've already done it for 5-6 years on springs and everything up in northern Washoe, and that's something I think we should really look into, because it's already a previous project that's already happened that we can kind of look into and make something happen now, rather than starting more projects, which I'm all in favor for, especially the deer collaring, but not to start another one that it's already been done. And then we got to wait for that data to come back. And I think the waiting period is kind of passed with the amount of deer that we don't have up there. So if we can take advantage of what they've already done, that'd be great. But is that something you can get back to us on, and like who's working on that, when the end game is, when they're going to send that to you, and something we can see?
Yeah, I wish Dan was here, because that was the first that I heard of it was the other day when he sent me that email and then put me in touch with, I believe his name was Pat. So yeah, I mean, I'll reach out to Pat and see how they're analyzing those data, or if it's just going to come back in a spreadsheet, where then it'll take some time to sift through and see, you know, where those cameras were and how many of each species were using it and stuff like that. But yeah, I'll reach out to Pat and see what the timeline is on that. And once again, I wish Dan was here, because I'm sure he would know.
And this is Steve Robinson. I know on the predation one for 033 for the coyote and mountain lion removal, that's not an option, but the department really needs to see if they can still get through that secretarial order, if we still have the authority to control all wildlife in the state of Nevada, like the last administration said we could. Something that really needs to be done in Sheldon.
Okay. So in terms of coyote and lion removal on the Sheldon, in terms,
Well, it can't be done right now,
right,
but we were given the opportunity to be able to control coyotes and lions on the Sheldon, and we chose not to. And I'm wondering if the window is still open for us to have the rights to manage all wildlife on the Sheldon, or if that window is closed.
okay.
I know the department did not want to do that, but it's something that should be done, or that limits that, hamstrings us in that area.
Okay. Could you be a little more specific in terms of what you mean by that window?
Well, I don't know if all the areas, there was a voting process for the secretarial order. And I don't know if it's closed. I don't know if it's open-ended that we have the right to manage all the wildlife in the federal lands, or I don't know if that opportunity is closed. And I'm making myself, the secretarial order, Zinke made a secretarial order that said that Nevada has the right to manage all wildlife on all the lands, which included predators. And that was our opportunity to remove lions or hunt, not just remove them, but hunt coyotes and lions on the Sheldon. And I don't know if that's too late. I know the department did not want to do that. They were afraid of losing political capital and having to do a NEPA study for that, but it's something that we should look into to see if we could still exert that right.
Okay. I can reach out to the Sheldon and see, what they have going in terms of, loopholes that we can get around, try and do that. But I'll call the Sheldon and see what I could do before the next meeting. But I'm not super sure on that one. Okay, the last one is wildlife health and disease. So for that, there's disease testing, an age structure study, limit harassment, adjust tag numbers. Oh, and I lied. I'm sorry. There's actually more sections than that, but that was just what I could see. So out of the wildlife health and disease, we didn't have a 5 in the disease category because we don't have any disease information. So, but it seems like there was support for knowing more about what's going on disease-wise with the deer herd. So is that something that we're interested in, or is that not as much of a concern?
I think we're definitely interested in it. It is an unknown and potential factor that we either need to know or we need to put it to bed.
And
it's not a factor.
All units?
All units.
Okay. All right. Then in terms of data gaps, I guess we could have moved disease testing down into a data gap, but we have big game collaring, trapping and transplant.
Hang on just a second. Back to wildlife health and disease. Well, that probably doesn't fit exactly, but the bottom line is adjust tag numbers.
Yep.
In my opinion, we should eliminate doe hunts from junior tags.
So that would just be adjust tag numbers, right? So we would put that as a priority.
Yeah, that's either under adjust tag numbers or in the data gaps, add or remove late hunts rather than late hunts. Again, I believe we should not be shooting mama deer and when there's only 3 of them.
And then this Steve Robinson also on the adjust tag numbers. Maybe the thought of changing the buck to doe ratios that we're going for, change the management plan, raise the buck to doe ratios in areas that are suffering which will reduce the tags that we're allotting. I know we've been trying to keep the numbers down in some of the areas that are suffering, and the department keeps wanting to jack them up. But maybe we should change the buck to doe ratio goals to something that's a bit higher than what we're doing already.
So the thinking there, just to be clear, would be to raise buck doe ratios to increase that herd population?
Well, immediately we'll reduce the tag numbers until the buck to doe ratio is higher and the herd's doing better.
I think what he's saying also is like, I think the department's using buck to doe ratios to increase or keep tags higher than what sportsmen want. So by increasing buck to doe ratios, it could decrease tags ultimately. But as long as you have a certain buck to doe ratio, they can keep on saying we need this many tags and taking out X amount of deer, which is well below carrying capacity. So that's why I think he's saying that increase buck to doe ratio.
Okay. So then maybe instead of add or remove late hunt, it is more of a adjust tag numbers if the end goal of that is to drop the tag numbers.
That, and I remove the late hunts as well. I mean, the deer in terrible shape and there's not that many of them out there. I would, yeah, definitely. I'd start limiting a lot of the hunts up there, especially, I like what Larry said. I don't know the data on the youth hunters on how many does they take, but I guarantee they take does. And yeah, that I think we should stop immediately. If we're trying to increase the population and I'm all about youth hunts, everything, opportunity for sure. But when we're trying to manage a population coming from as low as it is to get it higher and does are getting taken out, that's really counterproductive.
I mean, we're on the verge of closing seasons, guys.
Yeah.
Let's face it. And that would be one of the greatest failures of all of our mission. But if this trend continues, do we have a choice?
And then also, John, Steve Robinson, on the age structure study, what are you thinking on that? What is the department doing now to look at the age structure? There's like areas that that we keep bringing 014 forward because it's the problem. People are shooting, the majority are, very immature deer, and whether that's sustainable. So maybe we do need an age structure study, but I don't know what you guys are keeping track of or if it's been an important priority for you.
And the thing is, the report cards give you that. Your report card tells you how many 4-hip horns, how many 3 points, how many 4 points, and you have that data. I'm frustrated in that we don't need more studies on studies on studies. We need to be taking dollars and putting them on the ground, in my opinion, in emergency actions to try to turn these deer herds around.
That's why I was asking, what does he have in mind for that?
Yeah.
What are they thinking? Because they should already have a lot of that information.
That's my question is, what are they thinking?
So for that, it would be, and this is just my interpretation, but how you would do an age structure study is when deer are harvested, you would submit a tooth. The tooth goes into the lab, they cut a cross section on it, and you count the annuli on it, similar to, like tree rings. And then that's how they age it. So it would be from deer that were already harvested, then you submit the teeth and you look at the age structure that way.
think that's important, but I don't know if the priority.
Okay.
I think it's nice data to have. But I don't think it is a priority.
Okay.
Wouldn't that be something pretty simple though, just to do out with tags and give the envelope and have them do it anyway? I mean, that's not too tough to get going, is it?
Yeah, it all comes down to money as well as time. So
Yep, time and money.
time and money. So doubling back here for the adjust the tag numbers and then add or remove late hunt, which also got lumped in with the does being able, or juniors being able to remove does. For those, is that across all units, or is there a specific unit that you want me to highlight for those?
I think that's across all the units.
All units.
Okay. All right.
I think the only real late hunts is 015, 02, 1022 though, correct?
Yeah.
So
I would eliminate those.
You wouldn't eliminate the late ones and those?
It's migration.
I understand, but like there's,
It's the same herd. Yeah.
it's not that many deer. So.
Yeah.
And it's the easiest time to take them out. I would eliminate it. That's me. Yeah.
okay. And then with that, we have human impacts, direct or indirect, and then other. So is there anything within the mule deer needs section that, obviously wasn't on the first page, which we're going to borrow from Dan and Mark's habitat assessment?
Back to the data gaps. I had 5s on for all areas for big game collaring and trapping and transplant.
Okay. So
Yeah.
The trapping and transplant is something that we're very interested in as a group, I think. Not trying to speak for everybody, but I think it's pretty important.
I had 4s. I had 5s on big game collaring. Yeah. I had 1s for increased law enforcement, with the exception of 021, 022 close to town. I gave that a 2.
okay. And then did you have any others that you guys wanted added on here in the other category?
No, those were the on the human impacts. I don't know what we can do. Certainly tag numbers, eliminate doe hunts, so forth is something we can do as far as human impacts. But
I think some of that is for other areas where they're doing a lot of shed hunting and driving all around I don't think that happens so much in our areas because we don't have any sheds.
Yeah, but for example, 021, the Moon Rocks, the Petersons are lost. The dog skins are lost.
That is definitely.
You've got a motorcycle track on every square foot of it. And the only thing that saves a lot of 022 is there's fewer roads.
I see what you're saying. I agree.
Yeah.
That definitely is a problem in that area. So maybe 021.
021, 022 is and
off-road vehicles.
Yeah, off-road vehicles.
So that would be a potential limiting factor. What would a management action be for off-road vehicles other than, in the future when those pop up, obviously recommending against them if they're in critical mule deer habitat, but what are some that you guys would like to recommend or offer?
We need BLM needs to have a transportation plan. Okay, and I don't believe they have adopted a transportation plan, so people still think they can drive anywhere they want. So the strategy there would be a county-wide transportation plan.
Okay. Anything else that you guys want to add to the mule deer needs assessment, or do you want to kick it out to the public?
Well, this is Steve Robinson. I do have a question about limiting factor. And I don't know if you want this on the record, but what predator projects will the department allow us to propose? I'm serious about that.
I believe that as a subcommittee, like we put forth a proposal and it just depends on whether they choose to fund that proposal or not out of the 3 that we put forward. So, we just have to write a convincing argument for the predator project. I mean, if you look at it, they're funding predator projects all over the state. So it's not that they're against funding lion removal or funding coyote removal. It's just you have to have a proposal that goes with it that's going to get them to want to fund that project.
Okay.
Anything else before public comment? Okay. So Rex has left, so we don't have any in-person public comment. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. And the attendees, there are 3 people with their hand raised. So
Mel first. He was up.
Yep. Yeah, go for it, Cooper. And just as a reminder, you each have 3 minutes, and then we'll move on to the next person.
All righty, Mel, you're up.
Okay, Mel Belding. Going back to the very first, I missed something I think it's pretty important, where member Gleeful was bringing up using volunteers to collect these callers. I think you should expand that to people that live in Via and the Gerlach. Use these leasees that have those ranges out there. On your what the topic you're on now, green stripping was mentioned. Along with that, I believe it's critical for the center part of 012 to be left intact. It's the only intact property we have left there. Tons and tons of brush still around. We need to, rather than green stripping, we need a way, if a fire gets started in there, just hopefully it never does. We need a way to fight that fire. And we have the opportunity to do that with water storage. At the very north end, we've got the Massacre well. We should develop that. On the west side, we should develop the water in Hog Meadows. Work with the landowner there. High Rock Creek on the east side. We should build dams. And Larry's familiar with all this, what I'm mentioning, and Docking Corral Springs and Nellie Springs. We need to store water, whether it be with a tank that we can come and open up. If we do, heaven forbid, get a fire going on up there, we got we got a place where we can get some dipping going on with these helicopters. We need to take advantage of those and store some water. When you really look at it, a helicopter is not using that much water, but with just developing some of those springs that we have and storing water, whether it be in tanks or in a reservoir, we've got a chance to limit the size of those fires. So I think that's really important to go along with this discussion on green stripping. I believe in brown stripping, but green stripping looks better. So that's all I got. Thanks.
Thank you, Mel.
Okay, and we will go to Steve Kellers. Steve, go ahead. Please unmute. Steve, if you can unmute yourself.
Am I on now?
Yep.
Anyway, I agree with the predator control. The horse issue needs to be addressed, and I think that's pretty serious. I've seen some things happen out there with horses that are unbelievable. I also agree that there should not be any more doe hunting in areas that are affected by the lack of mule deer population. The one other thing is I'd like to mention is that if you're going to augment the deer herds with a trap and transplant, I really hope that you guys eliminate as many predators in the area that you're going to transplant the deer into as you possibly can. There's no sense in putting those deer on the dinner table. That's about all I got to say, and I really thank you, and thanks for letting me be part of this.
Thanks, Steve. Now we'll go to Joel Blakesley.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I wish I had an hour to talk about habitat, but I'll just say that maybe the volunteer thing could be used up there in some of those closed canopy, high brush, decadent stands where every plant's 100 years old, and that's cows. The Sheldon was at its peak of glory when the cows used to mow those bitter brush plants down and create leader growth and interspaces between the dense patches where seeds could grow. And that's all I need to say. Bitter brush is a rose bush, and when you prune it, it responds. So, but I'd like to talk about the junior hunts, and I'm okay with shutting down the doe hunts for the juniors, but I'd just put it in context. The lions will likely kill more deer tonight in northern Washoe than the junior hunters will. So let's concentrate on the macro versus the micro. So, and that's all I've got for now. Thanks.
Thank you. And now we will go to Lydia Teal.
Okay, thank you, Lydia Teal, for the record, and I'm representing myself tonight. I'd like to first commend this group of individuals who have been selected to represent sportsmen on this committee. The knowledge and experience from this group is inspirational, and I really am hopeful that sound solutions will come from this, and I really do encourage the department to make this a priority. The status and health of mule deer herds in Nevada is dire, and this is a time where major decisions need to be implemented in order to secure a sustainable future. I also just want to say that controversial action with regards to horse predators will need to be executed promptly before the situation is irreversible. I really do look forward to following the projects proposed by this group. It's been very insightful hearing the discussion today. I really enjoyed it. So thanks for allowing me to sit on for this, and I'm hopeful for the future. Thank you.
Okay. And I thought we had another hand up, but I don't see any more hands. Cooper, is that correct?
Yeah, I do not see any others, and there is no emails to Endow Game Division.
Okay. So with that, we can move on to the formal public comment, which is number 5. And then after that, we'll reconvene as a group and talk about future subcommittee meetings and where we want to take what we developed from the mule deer needs assessment. So once again, we'll jump right into opening this up where you each have 3 minutes apiece. And then this is just general public comment. You're free to discuss any topic that you'd like, and we can also comments from the email. So do any of the attend
Far home.
have anything else to add? Cooper, I can't see who has their hand raised. I can just see that there are 2.
Okay. Joel Blank, I will allow him to talk. Joel, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I'll just be short. I think the main thing that has to come out of this is there has to be some hard decisions about doing some controversial things. And if we're not going to do that, then there's no point really, you know, and that's all. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, and we have one more from Mel Belding. Mel, go ahead.
Mel Belding, just real quick, I agree with what we're talking about with the doe hunt, stop the doe hunts and all these units. I would also like to emphasize what's been said about the late season hunts in 015 and 021. These need to be stopped. They needed to be stopped a long time ago. There's been attempts in the past to stop these. We don't need to be killing these bucks in December just for opportunity. There's so few coming over here anyway, but let's just stop doing that. And I just want to reinforce augmentation. We transplant everything, and there's just no sound reason that I've ever read on the states that do transplant deer. There's no sound reasons not to. Thanks for the meeting, and hopefully you have a couple more. That's all I got.
And Cooper, I'm assuming there were no emails yet again?
Yeah, seeing no emails.
Okay. With that, we can go back to the subcommittee to discuss what our next step is in terms of meeting. Do we want to, before the next meeting, we're going to come forward with the top 5 habitat projects. And then do we want to think about starting to, not write proposals, but fill out the proposal form sheet?
Yeah. I have one, this is Steve Robinson. I have one question, John. Is there a funding timeline that we need to consider?
In terms of like how long it's going to take for Heritage to get us the money? Is that what you're saying?
No, is there a cutoff where if we don't get it done in the next month, then we lose an opportunity?
No, so not that I'm aware of. I believe that the deadline was extended before we were going to have our proposals to the committee by that August 6th, that August 6th commission meeting. I believe that that's been pushed by commission meetings. So not this upcoming one, but the next one. So we're definitely still ahead of the ball there. The constraint with funding and timing is going to be, that we may not receive that funding until January or something like that. So if it's a project that we're looking to do this fall, that's going to be the constraint, is we're not going to have the money right away because other groups need to submit their proposals as well. But we're not in jeopardy of missing out on any timeline or anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
Member Pitts, I think we should fill out, maybe like the homework that we did this time, fill out proposals for some projects, get them early so that we have some discussion points for the next meeting. And maybe it's just a starting point.
Okay. Yeah, no, I like that idea. I can send those to you again. Actually, yeah, I believe I only passed out like hard copies of those, but I can send you a digital copy so that each of you can fill a couple of those out. I'm not sure if my screen share is working here, but they're fairly simple forms. And then what I was envisioning is that we would fill out these proposal forms together. And then after we've solidified the 3 ideas that we want to do, both Tori, who's the habitat biologist, and myself would go through and, write more in-depth proposals to kind of be supplemental material to go with those forms and make some maps and things like that. So it's not just a form that we're submitting, maybe that gives us a leg up compared to some of the other subcommittees.
Perfect.
Okay. In terms of a timeline, I'm doing sheep flights and sheep captures here for a little bit, so it'll probably be looking at September. But I'll send out a doodle poll. Does that work for you guys? Or are you thinking September, or when are you thinking for the next one?
We only got one more week in August, so it's September, I guess.
Okay.
Early September.
Yeah, early would be better.
Earlier the better. Okay. All right. I'll send another doodle poll out with, the earliest available dates that I have.
Okay.
All right. Does anyone from the subcommittee have anything else to add, or we're good?
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So with that, the time is now 8:21, and we will conclude this meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.